Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Hello and welcome into another edition of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik, and it is Friday, June 5th, and this is episode number 194 of the Baseball Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. As always, we very much appreciate you guys listening. If you would quickly just rate and review the podcast wherever you're listening. If it's on Apple Podcasts, scroll up, click the 5 stars, write a review. We'll read them here on the show. No new reviews to read you guys since Monday's episode, so that'll be a goal. Over the weekend, since Friday until Monday, when you're listening to this podcast, write a review. We'll read you out here on the show. And if you're on Spotify, give us a like, share, subscribe. We really appreciate it out there. But, guys, today's episode is going to be a little bit different. We love talking Major League Baseball, international baseball, anything that relates to baseball. And this topic will relate to baseball just a little bit, but it's now time to talk about the Black Lives Matter movement and what's going on in America. And yes, it's June 4th. It's better late than never. It seems to be that if you haven't made a statement, that's making a statement in your own right. Well, that's not what I wanted to do here at the Baseball Podcast, but Sunday night, last recording, it was still when things were very much crazy and very much kind of finding their way. They're, rioting, looting, all of that. And then last night, Wednesday night, when we have our usual recording of the podcast, there was a pretty crazy storm here in Philadelphia, and it whacked all the power and the power of my house for about 14 hours. So I wasn't able to get in front of a computer and record for you guys. And Major League Baseball finally released a statement yesterday, Wednesday, June 3rd. And here's kind of my statement or the first segment on what's going on here with the Baseball Podcast. But, honestly out there, if you guys don't know my background yet, haven't checked it out, I'm obviously a white male, 31 years old. Grew up in the upper middle class. All I've ever known is being kind of well off in that white privilege conversation. It's something that growing up the way I did that you're not really aware of just based on your surroundings, because you're living in a good neighborhood. You're surrounded by good kids and safe families, and there was no worry about going to play basketball out in the neighborhood or playing roller hockey out in the street or riding your bike through your neighborhood, down the street, through the woods to the local park to then play baseball or go to the jungle gym or whatever it was at the time. I've never had that feeling of uneasiness around the place I live or going outside. So I'm not going to speak like I am aware of what's going on. I just know that having this conversation now is very uneasy and very uncomfortable for me, because I'm going, oh man, I'm behind a microphone. I have a bit of a platform here to communicate with all of you listening out there about a topic that everyone is discussing, but with the cancel culture that we have in America, I'm afraid I'm going to say something that's going to upset people or get me canceled. But as I listen to more and more individuals speak about what's happening, and more athletes speak about what's happening, and friends and family members and all of the above, I believe that having conversations like this, difficult conversations, uneasy conversations, is the way that we're going to continue to grow and actually have movement for this cause. Because what happened with George Floyd, it struck a chord not only with the African American community that has clearly been screaming and crying and begging us for help. And I say us, I mean white Americans, because they've been doing this on their own, and this is a battle that they're still fighting for hundreds and hundreds of years now. And now that it is 2020 and the timing aspect of it coming off a global pandemic, very much struck a chord, because for the last 90 days, us as a human race have gone through something that nobody alive has experienced before. It's not the color of your skin. It's not where you're from. It's a virus that doesn't discriminate on that. All over the globe, cases of the coronavirus. So we were one as a human race almost to come together and beat this virus. And for something like this to then come out and happen right after things are starting to open up and haven't even started to open up, it just shows how divided things are in certain places. And as a community of the human race that was starting to kind of bond together, and everyone, just try to get through something, to see one of your fellow humans go through that type of pain and suffering, you just felt that no matter who you were. And I know, again, African Americans have been begging us white individuals to get involved. And for the first time, it just seems like that is ultimately going to be the case. It feels like things this time are going to be a little bit different than they were in the past. And again, it just seems that before things were, people are upset, a week, 2 weeks goes by, and then it goes back to the status quo. And now I feel as if there's actual movement and momentum behind the reaction to what happened to George Floyd. And as well as because I think it was one of those situations where it wasn't a gunshot, or we thought he was carrying a weapon, and it's a life or death situation. Because honestly, I don't know any cops that are like direct friends. I have friends of friends who are cops, or brothers of friends, that type of thing, who I don't really know who are cops. But I know myself being put in that type of adrenaline situation. Obviously, cops have training, XYZ, but as, just putting myself, closing my eyes in a high leverage situation, life or death, potentially, it's there's a little bit of you that says, man, okay, maybe, but in this case where an officer had his knee on a human's back / neck for 8.5 minutes, you just go, how can you do that as a human? I mean, if I sat here on the microphone for the next 8.5 minutes and there was nothing but silence, you guys would think that was an eternity. So to not have just human decency and human morals to release your knee for 15 seconds and then put it back down if you want to, and for none of the other cops to just say, hey, man, ease up a little bit. That's why everything is continuing the way it is. But just clearly the culture of, right, left, black, white, Republican, Democrat, whatever it is, the divide in America is still very deep, because on social media you still see the videos of the humans who are against the Black Lives Matter movement, or you still see the All Lives Matter crowd. And yes, they know all lives matter. They're not saying only Black Lives Matter. It is, yes, include Black lives in your White Lives Matters movement, white people, is essentially what they're yelling at us. And I think, again, the amount of athletes that have stepped up and communicated, the amount of white athletes who have said something, because, again, it's an uncomfortable thing to say, because you're going to piss somebody off somewhere. It's like getting into politics where you're just trying to win 51% of the vote. Whatever you're going to do, you're going to upset almost half the people out there. That's kind of what this conversation is, and that's where it's uncomfortable. Let's have it. Let's discuss it. Let's move forward. Once again, I myself kind of stumbling through the first segment here, and I appreciate all you guys bearing with me here if you've made it this far, but it's just one of those things that I don't know what to do moving forward. I don't know how I'm going to change my day-to-day approach. I think I'm going to try to be more open and understanding and more present in time of not making jokes or laughing at jokes or using certain communication or certain language, because there's a little bit of us out there who are all of us in the Caucasian world who enjoy the black culture. We just watched The Last Dance with Michael Jordan. If you're a 90s kid, you came up with the Jordans. You came up with the swag of Jordan. You wanted to be like Mike. It didn't matter if you were a white kid or a black kid. You wanted to be like Mike. So you followed that culture, followed that entity. And I think it was Jalen Rose who said on ESPN, if only white people actually liked black people as much as they like black culture, we could get somewhere here in this world. And I thought that was a very powerful statement and hit home for somebody like myself who very much, I enjoy rap music. I like black movies. You know, I don't, again, that's probably not the right term, but I apologize. You know, it's one of those things. I just, oh man, it's a tough conversation, but it's one that needs to happen. The social media post, Blackout Tuesday, obviously taking place, and I'm not one for social media posts like that. I guess see kind of ultimately what it accomplished. It really doesn't move the needle, but it just shows solidarity and support for your brothers and all the everybody protesting to equal rights and moving and getting away from the excessive force that we see used by the police out there. It's just, man, what a wild time. But that'll wrap it up for the first segment here of the GSMC Baseball Podcast. I appreciate you guys riding with me for that. That was the first time behind a microphone here that I've really had to have a conversation like that. And, you know, it felt like I was turning pretty often there, trying to make my way through it, ultimately get my thoughts out there and try to communicate what I mean. So again, if I offended somebody, I do apologize. I'm just trying to kind of say how I feel and talk with everyone out there. So hopefully you enjoyed it, but we're going to pause right now for a word from one of our sponsors, one of our sister shows. And when we come back here in the second segment, we're going to get into Major League Baseball. We're going to talk about the players' proposal, which you guys know all about by now, but where do we go from here? What's next? Hang around and find out.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. Thanks again for joining me here on episode number 194 on Friday, June 5th. We're giving you an update now on Major League Baseball. Where do we stand? Last time we recorded, it was the day before the players made their proposal. So everybody knows by now, 114 games, full salary. Yes, there was deferred money if the postseason gets canceled because apparently one of the big sticking points for Major League Baseball, as we're continuing to learn more and more here as the days go by, is that they are worried about a second wave of this virus returning when the weather starts to get colder again. The science tells us that the air, the warmth, doesn't allow the virus to travel as far, being transmitted person to person, but as things start to cool down again, we could potentially find ourselves battling a second wave due to the decreased weight of the air, allowing the particles to travel further and not sink to the ground right away, something like that. You guys get it. But ultimately, they do not want to play into the month of November. They don't want to even have to go down to Florida or Arizona to finish up the season in a neutral site stadium or anything like that. So very, very dismissive from the owner's side of 114 games and extending the year into November. That's where the players tried to offset that by deferring the money, if that was the case, but ultimately wasn't enough for the owners to jump at it and bite the cheese, so to speak, on the offer. But like we discussed, the first offer from the owners, ideal offer for them. The players get it, say, hey, we can't even negotiate off of this. Let's make our ideal counteroffer. Now both parties know ideally what each other wants. So who will make the next move? Major League Baseball has come out. It's been reported that as of right now, they do not plan to make a counter proposal back to the players. This is a clear negotiating tactic. It's happened before. Hey, here's what we want. Now we're going to leave it up to you. You come back with something ridiculous. Okay, we're going to wait until you actually respond to our previous offer or previous proposal and not just completely ignore it and give us everything that you want. Or we're going to wait for another proposal that's a little bit closer to what we want and we can actually meet in the middle. It's a tough conversation that's going to have to be had here over the next couple of days or the next week or so, like we discussed. But it's one of those things where you talk to people within the industry, you talk to players, you talk to owners, and there seems to be a guarded optimism brewing or a general positivity out there that things are going to get done and they are going to move forward and come to an agreement. And we've said all along that the players aren't dumb. They're not stupid. They know that if they don't have a season, they don't get paid at all, and it's not good for the future when it comes to the bottom line. The owners know that you're going to alienate the fans if you don't have a season. Will they come back? How many will you piss off? A lot of the owners were around in 1994 for that strike. A lot of the people in front offices were around for then, so they know how long it took baseball to recover. Everybody still talks about McGwire and Sosa saving the sport in 1998 with the home run chase 3 years later. So that's something that they don't want to go through in the middle of a pandemic when the economy is nowhere near as strong. So if you lose that many people and alienate that many fans, not a good business decision from the ownership side. So they're going to move forward. They're going to come together at a deal. There's been floated out here again, as I complained last episode, that everything is becoming public now that it's 2020. Well, the latest rumor that's hit the Twitter sphere is that the owners are going to propose an idea of about 50 games, only 50 games, but paying the players their full prorated salary that they discussed on in March. Now, I didn't do the actual math, and I would love for one of our listeners out there to do the math and let me know on social media ultimately what the player salary number comes out to, because that's the number I think that they are looking at. It's not the amount of games that I think is the ultimate sticking point. I don't think it's the number of guys on the roster, but it's the amount of dollars that are going to be paid in total player salaries that the owners are looking to negotiate. So, in the MLB proposal, the first one that went over, based on the pay cuts top to bottom, 80 games, it was $1.2 billion that they had budgeted or written out for player salaries for 2020. So that's a relatively low number. Obviously you were looking at 80% pay cuts for Mike Trout from $35 million a year down to $7 or whatever it was, if I'm remembering off the top of my head. But the players' counter proposal, back to the owners, that included $2.8 billion of total player salary. So the owners basically balked because the players came back with $1.6 billion in more money for them to pay. So you look at that number and your common fan, your myself behind the microphone would go, okay, if we're looking at somewhere around $2 billion, potentially we have ourselves a deal. So if they play 50 games, that's about 30% of the actual length of the season. So whoever's doing the math out there, check the total salaries, divide it by 30. If you have a calculator that can count that high, doing all those numbers. But it's going to be a lot of money, and I think that's the first domino that needs to fall. It is coming to the conclusion of, okay, essentially they offered 1.2, we offered 2.8. 1.6 billion is a huge gap. Imagine if you were negotiating for a house or for a car or whatever it was, and you came in 16,000 off on the price of the car, or 160,000 off on the price of the house. Well, they're 1.6 billion off on the price of the 2020 baseball season. So that's the point where we're at. Somebody do that math. Hopefully, if that number comes in around $2 million, it could potentially be the middle part, but I have a feeling it's going to be closer to kind of 1.5. I don't think the owners are going to jump right to that 2 mark and meet them in the middle, but the players want to play more games. They feel that obviously more games would be a better representation of the year, a better representation of ultimately who the champion is. But there's growing sentiment on the other side that if these talks continue to be sluggish and continue to go nowhere, if June 11th comes, June 18th, and we're getting into the month of July, don't give up ultimately on the baseball season yet, because I've heard some people discuss that they could come to an agreement in the month of July and then potentially play 30 to 35 games in the month of September, almost like a March Madness kind of style round robin, and then you get into an October postseason where every team makes the playoffs. Again, it's almost a tournament style of bracket, kind of a March Madness super sprint of baseball, best of 3 series. Think NCAA playoffs, 64 teams make it, best of 3s, regionals, that type of conversation is what they're thinking they could have over the course of 4 to 6 weeks. Do a 30-game regular season, rank the teams based on record, go into an NCAA style of tournament. Obviously, it would be the most outlandish thing we've ever seen, but we again discussed that normalcy is not a thing right now for baseball. It's not a thing for professional sports in 2020. We're just trying to get them back on the field as soon as possible and giving us entertainment, allowing us to enjoy ourselves at night, allowing us to come home and escape things that are going on out there. And the money that's involved, again, is so large that they're really, really going to have to come to a deal. But I truly think both sides are taking a step back, kind of going, okay, this is their ideal situation. What do we concede on? What do we meet them in the middle on? The players are doing it. The owners are doing it. Hopefully those concessions align, because if the players say this and the owners say no way, man, that would just be one of the most frustrating things moving forward. But today, Thursday, June 4th, coming up here in the evening, East Coast time, no additional movement yet on ultimately who would make the next proposal. The 50-game mark still being floated out there. I think it's going to happen. Again, listening to Trevor Bauer, who was on the Pat McAfee show yesterday, the day before, whenever you're listening to this podcast, but he had some positive things to say. He basically stated that he thinks it's going to get done, and he's 95% confident that it's going to get done, even though we've talked about owners. Clearly, some of them have discussed shutting down and counting their losses, basically moving on to 2021. But baseball's going to come back. I feel it. Hopefully, by the Sunday's episode, Monday's recording, we'll have the latest proposal and the latest update from one of the parties involved. But that'll wrap it up here for the second segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. When we come back, we're going to be talking about the MLB Draft. I'm going to be talking about number 1 overall picks, who were the best of all time, some of the worst of all time, some of the people in the middle, but it's going to be fun, and you should join us. So we'll pause right now for a word from one of our sponsors, one of our sister shows within the network. I am Kevin Mahalik. This is the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Stick around, everybody. We'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Thank you for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik. Once again, this is episode number 194 of the Baseball Podcast. If you've listened to all episodes, all 194 of them, if there's honestly somebody out here who has done that, please let me know. I would love to shout you out. That would be amazing. If you've been listening since I started, let me know. Shoot me a message, write a comment. We'll get you a shout out there as well. But if you could, head to social media, like, subscribe, follow, whatever it is out there on all the pages, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, the GSMC Podcast Network, as well as each individual podcast within the network, because We do everything beyond baseball, soccer, college football, beyond sports, music, movies, news, podcasts, sex, anything. It's on the podcast network. Check it out. There's something for you out there to listen to. We appreciate everything that you do for us. But heading into right now, our MLB draft talk, we're going to discuss number 1 overall draft picks. I figured this time, we've been talking a little bit different style of version of the draft every episode, and I said, hey, number 1 overall, who is the best of all time? Who was the worst of all time? And there's some cool names, as well as some individuals I hadn't heard of, but that's probably why they were some of the worst number 1 overall draft picks of all time. So the number 1 overall pick, the number one overall pick, the best number 1 overall pick of all time, Alex Rodriguez, Seattle Mariners, 1993 shortstop. Obviously, A-Rod, 3-time MVP, 14-time All-Star, just shy of 700 home runs, an over 20-year career. Yes, of course, linked to the performance-enhancing drugs. Who ultimately knows if he's going to make the Hall of Fame? Guys creeping up later in their availability on the ballot. We shall see, but you can't argue with his career. A wins above replacement or a WAR of 117.8. Very impressive. So obviously a hit there at number 1 for Seattle. But my question is, how was Seattle back at number 1 overall in 93 when this guy hit number 1 overall in 87? The other guy, the kid, Junior. Ken Griffey Jr., 1987, Seattle Mariners. A career WAR of 83.8 for Junior. The first kid who had swag, rocking his hat backwards. What was it, Nintendo 64, Ken Griffey Jr. baseball. Can't remember if it had a slick name or if that was the name, but when he hit, you hit start, and then you went over to the pad, left, right, left. Griffey would point at the pitcher, and you knew if you made contact, it was a home run. It was the best cheat code in the business. Just play with the Mariners. Every time he's up, it's a home run. So try to get on base before him, and boom, 3-run salami. But Junior also played 22 years, 630 career home runs, obviously a Hall of Famer. And then number 3, these top 3 were really kind of in a class of their own when it came to number 1 overall picks. And then there's a little bit of a next tier or a next step down when it comes to that level. But number 3, Chipper Jones, Atlanta Braves, 1990, third baseman, career WAR of 85.2, just ahead of Griffey there, but I'm a Junior guy, so I put him second. Chipper, everybody knows in Atlanta, 13 consecutive division titles, World Series title, 468 home runs, hitting over 300 for his career. Just super impressive, a lot of fun to watch. One of those guys that after he retired, you realize how much fun he was to watch. As a Phillies fan growing up, dislike for Chipper Jones. I had to bite my tongue there. It was a different word coming out, but a strong dislike for Chipper Jones just because of how successful he was against the Fightin' Phils for all those years. But rounding out the top 5, we got Darryl Strawberry, New York Mets, 1980, outfielder with a WAR of 42.2. 8-time All-Star, won a World Series with the Mets in 86 and 3 with the Yankees in 96, 98, and 99. 335 career home runs. Obviously, things went a little downhill at the tail end of his career, but a really good ball player and a good number 1 overall pick. And that's, again, not the top players, but the guys who went number 1 overall. So, number 5, I rounded out the list of the top 5 with Joe Mauer, catcher, first baseman for the Twins, hometown kid in 2001, career WAR of just under 55 at 54.9. Mauer's the only catcher to win 3 batting titles and the only one to do so in the American League. So, catcher who could hit. That's why he went number 1 overall. And obviously a success. Here we are just retiring a handful of years ago. I've met Joe Mauer, spoken with Joe Mauer, really good dude. I had a real good time talking to him. But some of the others, some of the best who could continue up the list, or some who have already retired. Bryce Harper, Nationals, his WAR at 27, NL Rookie of the Year, NL MVP. He's only 25, so he'll be going forward. Adrian Gonzalez for the Marlins in 2000, first baseman. He played for years, got paid a lot of money. 5-time All-Star, 4-time Gold Glove winner. over 300 home runs, 2,000 hits. Harold Baines for the White Sox in 77, known for his clutch at-bats. Let's see, 7th in AL history with grand slams. He could obviously rake back in the day. You got Josh Hamilton. Let's see, Darren Erstad, Carlos Correa, Steven Strasburg. A little bit of the more recent ones, Garrett Cole potentially, now that he's the highest paid pitcher ever, Pat Burrell. Yeah, so those are positives out of the number one slot when utilizing the number one overall pick. But who were some of the worst number one overall picks? Well, there's a guy by the name of Brian Taylor who seems to top pretty much every list there is out there on the internet. I like to cross-reference, cross-function my lists, get multiple resources out there for people who I don't really know because they were before my time. Well, Brian Taylor went to the Yankees in 1991, left-handed pitcher out of high school. People thought he was going to be Dwight Gooden from the left side, if you read some of the scouting reports nowadays. Well, a few years into his career, he got into a fist fight in the offseason. The Yankees wanted him to go to the Arizona Fall League. He said, no, I'm going to go back home and train. Well, apparently him and his brother got into a scuffle, and he tore his labrum, tore up his shoulder in a fist fight scuffle in the offseason, and was never the same, had to have surgery, never made it to the bigs. And the Yankees obviously missed back in 91 overall. Imagine if in 91 they got stud at number one, where they would be at the end of the 90s in that dynasty. Just fascinating to think about. But this next guy, once again, Steve Chilcott, 1966, New York Mets, a catcher. His career was derailed by injuries, many shoulder, finger, elbow. I forget. I was reading all different types of ways. Guys sliding into him, off the field, all types of stuff going on for Steve there. But the most recent one at number 3, Mark Appel. Mark Appel went to Houston at number 1 out of Stanford University in 2013. This was after he got drafted like 6th overall, went back to school, and then went number 1 overall. So this is multiple times where this guy was picked in the top 10 or top 15 by different organizations and never made it to the show. Got to AAA with the Phillies. He never made it in Houston. They had their ball club coming up. He was supposed to be part of this core that's happening right now, and he never develops. Ultimately, he was traded to the Phillies. I forget who the key piece in that trade was going back to Houston. But AAA with the Phillies, the Iron Pigs, never made the show, and then injuries started piling up on the tail end of his career, and never made it out. So a couple of others here. Let's see. Bradley Aiken from the Astros as well, 2014. Back-to-back number 1 overall picks who really haven't made a huge impact. And then the Phillies, once again, Mickey Moniak. Not too long ago, a handful of years. Not writing off Mickey, not giving up on Mickey Moniak just yet. But if you read, he's clearly been a disappointment to this. Sluggish, underdeveloped. There's a lot of negativity floating around Mickey Moniak in the National Baseball Circle. So as a Phillies fan, I didn't want to be biased, and I threw him in there. But you got A-Rod, Griffey Jr., Chipper Jones, and then pretty much everybody else on the top end. And then Brian Taylor, Mark Appel, and Steve Chilcott, I believe, are the only 3 individuals to be drafted number 1 overall and never make it to the bigs. A lot of guys make it and didn't perform well, but only those 3 never actually made it to the show and made their MLB debut. But that'll wrap it up for the third segment here overall of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I appreciate each and every one of you guys listening out there. We're going to pause right now for a word from one of our sponsors and one of our sister shows, but when we come back, we're going to dive into a bit of a fun segment. We're going to talk about the most home runs hit by month. Yeah, that's right. How many in April? How many in May? Who leads through May, through June? We're going to discuss it all. We're going to check out Baseball Almanac, have ourselves a little bit of fun. So stick around, everybody out there. This is Kevin Mahalik, the GSMC Baseball Podcast. We'll be right back.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World
Listen now.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. We've had a great show so far for you. We're just past the halfway mark here. Segment number 4. We've talked about Black Lives Matter, the movement, everything going on out there currently in America. Then we gave you guys the latest update between the negotiations with the players and the owners, where we at, who's going to make the next proposal. Then we talked about the best and worst number 1 overall picks in draft history. And now, for this segment, we're diving into home runs by month. I've looked at 4 home runs in a game, 20 strikeouts in a game. Well, I've decided to open it up. I was looking at weeks, months, and it hit me. How many home runs has somebody hit in a month? What is that high mark? And then which month did it take place? What's the high for the different months? Really, what are we looking at here? Because I had this thought due to the baseball season, and I said, okay, if it's 50 games, well, who typically gets off to a hot start? Who starts fast? Or who has the most home runs in August, because it's going to be the month of August, and maybe it's the weather. Maybe it's not the fact that you start fast, you're ahead of the game, and people adjust to you. Maybe it's just that it's cold out, and you don't like hitting in the cold, and you wait till the weather warms up, and then the bats warm up, and then you warm up. So where are we at here? What are we looking at? And then I was diving into the months, and I came across a heck of a website, Baseball Almanac here, looking at stats, looking at every month, and I went, man, I didn't know all of that. That's pretty good stuff. So for the month of April, let's look at the month of March here as we've started to get into the month of March. The number is 4 for the NL and the AL. And again, it's all 2018 and beyond, because not before that, they started in April. Well, now it's gotten into March, where in the American League, Chris Davis hit 4 home runs for the Oakland A's to have the lead in the American League. And then over in the National League last year, Christian Yelich, Paul Goldschmidt, and Cody Bellinger each hit 4 home runs. So your lead is 4 for the month of March. Pretty wild. But going into the month of April in the American League, Alex Rodriguez for the Yankees hit 14 in 2007, and Albert Pujols is your leader with 14 in 2006 back in St. Louis. So 14 is the number to beat in the month of April, and that's the first full month of the season. So if we get 50 games and you're looking at the first 30 in the month, you get 14. So if a guy would hit 15 or 20, man, that would be a heck of a pace right out of the jump if you got to that mark for 50 games. Jeez, wow. So most home runs in May 1st through May 31st. Edwin Encarnacion hit 16 for Toronto in 2014 to tie Mickey Mantle, who for the Yankees back in 1956 also hit 16 home runs. In the National League, Barry Bonds in the summer of 2001. Maybe we'll see that one more than once on here, but he had 17 for the San Francisco Giants. So there's your leader for the first 2 months, 17, the most in the clubhouse here for May. But who's had the most through May 31st? If we're looking here, through April 30th, we talked about everybody with 14. Through May 31st, Ken Griffey Jr. with 24 in the American League. So in March and April, he combined them in 1997, and then Barry Bonds with 28 through May 31st. Man, that's, again, May 31st, you're looking at 40 games and having 28 dingers. That's crazy. So going to the month of June, let's see here. June 1st through June 30th. Bob Johnson, Philadelphia, 1934. Here we go, 15. Okay. He's tied with Roger Maris, who did it in 1961 for the Yankees, and Babe Ruth back in 1930. 15 home runs in the American League. Sammy Sosa, here it is. Here's your high for a month ever. Sammy Sosa hit 20 home runs in the month of June in 1998. That gets back to where I talked about saving baseball and potentially losing fans. It's hard not to tune into a baseball game when a guy hits 20 home runs in a month. That means that out of, 28 games in 31 days, 29 games, he's homering in 66. % of his games for that month. That's just outrageous on what's going on. Most home runs through June 30th, Barry Bonds, 39 in 2001. Ken Griffey Jr. had 32 in 1994 through June 30th. Let's see here. All right, July 1st through the 31st. Albert Bell. Wow, there's a name for you. 1998. Mark McGwire hit 16 for St. Louis in 1999, the year after the home run chase. So let's see, man, 16 in July. You would think with the weather they'd be closer to that 20 mark with Sammy Sosa, with the balls flying a little bit better. Because 14 in April, you already got 16 in May. May would, be a little chillier than July. Just interesting, again, a little tidbit I was checking out. But Rudy York hit 18 in the month of August in 1937. That was your high until Slammin' Sammy came along in 1998. And then most recently, Giancarlo Stanton hit 18 in the month of August for the Miami Marlins back in 2017. He tied the record, or the second overall highest month in Major League Baseball history. Going to the month of September, Albert Bell with Cleveland had 17 in 1995. That's a heck of a close in 95 for Albert, the last month of the season there. Babe Ruth also did that in 1927. Wow, 17 home runs in the month of September for the Babe. And then Ralph Kinner for Pittsburgh in 1949 had 16 home runs, carrying the Pirates down the stretch there back in the day. Let's look into October. Again, how many games played in October? Not a ton, which means your leader is 4 in the American League. George Brett, Jose Cruz Jr., a few other guys have done it. The leader for October overall comes from the National League. Sammy Sosa with 5 and Richie Sexson with 5. And both of them in 2001. Wow, really carrying guys down the stretch there in 2001. Pretty wild. So, let's see. Some of the other wacky statistics I was looking at here. Most home runs in any month during a season by a left-hander. I was like, okay, who's it going to be? Well, obviously Barry Bonds in the National League. We talked about it. He had 17 in the month of May 2001. And then I was thinking in the American League, and I got a little bit stumped. And then I was like, oh, duh. Babe Ruth back in 1927 had 17 with the New York Yankees. So what about a right-hander? Sammy Sosa. He's from that side. Obviously, he had 20 June of 98. And then Rudy York having 18 back in 1937 from the right side holds the American League record. Most home runs during a rookie season. Rudy York, Detroit, 18. That was his rookie year, lighting it up. Adam Dunn had 12 in the month of August in 2001 during his rookie season. That would be awesome as a rookie to throw up 12. But most home runs in any month by a switch hitter. Here you go. Mickey Mantle, okay, American League, 16, 1956. And then Ken Caminiti in the National League. He had 14 in the month of August back in 1996. Ken Caminiti gets on the home run record chart here. But here's the deal, guys. If they're playing 50 games or it's a sprint more in that 30 to 35 range, again, you're looking at 10, 15, 20 home runs would be outlandish because you times that by 3 to get there. You're looking at a 60 home run season. We haven't seen that in the longest time. If we're looking at 50 to 55, again, you're looking at 15. That's right on that 45 pace. And we've seen certain months only have 14. So if you're looking at a month and a half, yeah, I think 15 to 20 would be a crazy month offensively at the plate. But, yeah, that was fun. I just enjoyed looking at that. I was kind of scrolling through some statistics, figuring out what I wanted to talk about. And it was most home runs in a month by a switch hitter, Ken Caminiti in the National League. There's a statistic, a trivia question you can use for your friends and family out there. But that'll wrap it up for the fourth segment here of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Coming up down the stretch here of the show, we got a nice close for you today. Coming up in the fifth segment, we're going to be talking baseball reference and Stratomatic, as well as there's out of the park simulation that we're just going to touch on ever so briefly. I haven't found the website directly to interact with that one to get as much detail to talk to you guys about it, but every now and then there's an article written about some things that are happening, so I want to bring it up as just kind of a third option and see if we can learn more about injuries, standings, and continue to cross-reference. And then our sixth and final segment, based on one of our viewers out there, gave us a suggestion after leaving a 5-star rating. We appreciate you again, Pitt fan number 1 or Pitt number 1. I can't remember. I apologize. But they wanted to hear some managers who we'd put in the golf match. Again, Tiger, Phil, we had Tom Brady, Peyton Manning. Well, which MLB managers would you guys want to watch play golf for 4 hours and just hear them tell stories? We're going to talk about that as we wrap up today's show. But right now, we're going to pause for a word from one of our sponsors, one of our sister shows, and when we come back, we're talking baseball simulations. Stick around, everybody.
Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik, as always. I appreciate you guys making it this far on today's episode here, Friday, June 5th, episode number 194 of the Baseball Podcast. Hopefully you're having a great week out there and continuing to stay safe. Everything that's going on across the major metropolitan areas. If you live in a city or a downtown or own a business, again, hopefully everything is okay for you. Hopefully you're staying safe, as well as with the coronavirus. I know things have slowed down. We seem to have flattened the curve here as Americans. We seem to have had a positive influence by social distancing, wearing a mask, doing all of the above. It seems to be working, but it hasn't completely disappeared. So continue to stay safe, continue to wear a mask, social distance where possible, wash your hands, do all of the above to help all of us contain, what's going on. But this is a fun segment. I like to look at the simulations that are going on out there across Baseball Reference and Stratomatic. Well, there's a third entity that is doing a simulation as well, Out of the Park Baseball, and they're a little bit more difficult to kind of find day-to-day statistics or results to be able to communicate with you guys on a regular basis. But every now and then there's a news article that kind of breaks down the latest on what's going on, looks at some of the big picture bullet points. And I thought that was relevant for you guys to kind of talk about today, because there's a few different ones on here that jumped out as potential precursors to what could happen. And the first one is that Jake Arrieta is done for the year, and he's done in a Phillies uniform. He tore his labrum during the simulation. But to be fair, it says in 12 starts, Arrieta was 1-10 with a 7.26 ERA. And in Philadelphia, if Arrieta gets anywhere close to 1-10, he wouldn't make it past 1-4 until heads would be rolling for Arrieta to be demoted out of the bullpen, whatever. You're paying this guy $25 million. What a bum. We signed him for 3 years. He stank. I can't believe it. That would just, oh my God. If he was 1-10 with a 7.26, it would never get there. It would never get there. So that's one instance where this simulation would never come true, because the fans would never allow that to actually take place. The Arizona Diamondbacks land Kirby Yates, closer Kirby Yates, going from the Padres to the Diamondbacks. The Padres year probably hasn't been going well. 25-39 based on the standings up here for the Padres. So they ship out their closer. The Padres get back right-handers Corbin Martin and Dre Jameson, as well as infielders Kershaw, Lynch, and Darren Cuevas. Yates figures to step in at closer for the Diamondbacks this year. The Diamondbacks currently at 35-27, trailing the Dodgers. So Arizona makes a push in the middle of summer to try to continue having a good summer. So the Astros acquire Richards. Let's see. The Astros, who won 8 games in a row now, 9-1 in their last 10, added Garrett Richards to the rotation. Richards has a 4.07 ERA, but they sent the Padres getting rid of Garrett Richards as well. Wow. So Houston's in the basement at 28-34. Apparently they think last year is going to have a big effect on them this year, but I don't know. We'll see. We'll wait and see. That's just interesting. So Astros outfielder Kyer Tucker, he continues to lead the league in steals with 23. They have that as a bit of a surprise. Your hitting performance of the week, Juan Soto. Let's see. Soto had a big game going 3 for 3 against the Phillies with a pair of home runs. He's now hitting .320 with 14 home runs. And your pitching performance of the week, Twins right-hander Jake Odorizzi. Used to play for Tampa, but just threw a no-hitter against Tampa Bay. He walked 3, struck out 12, which was his only positive because he has a 5.69 ERA on the season. So, guy throws a no-hitter with a 5.6 ERA. Some pretty crazy things happening on outside the park. But let's see, looking at the team standings, the Rays and Yankees again, Twins and Indians, like we've seen. But the Angels, 41-21. Oh, baby, they could surprise. Braves and Nationals. The Reds, wow, again, that was my possible surprise team. I could see it happening, I'm telling you. The White Sox are over 500. That's my surprise team in the American League. Let's go. Out of the park, on board with the Reds and White Sox, who could have scared some people this year. And then the Diamondbacks and Dodgers out west. So pretty much status quo when it comes to standings. Let's check Stratomatic standings here. As of June 4th, let's see ultimately where we stand. Team-wise, we got Tampa Bay, followed by New York, Cleveland, followed by Minnesota, and Houston, followed by Oakland in the American League. That means your AL wildcard standings are Minnesota, Oakland, and then your next two, if we were to expand, would be Kansas City and the New York Yankees. The Yankees only at 32-31 would be a huge disappointment in a national news story. Ultimately, if they weren't anywhere close to the top team in the league. With their record winning 100-plus games last year, adding Garrett Cole, getting some guys back from the injured list, they got to be at the top of the league, or Aaron Boone is going to be out of job sooner than later. So we'll have to wait and see how that would play out here. But in the National League, Washington at the top of the East still, Atlanta trailing them, St. Louis in the Central being trailed by the Cubs, and then the Dodgers out west leading San Diego by a healthy margin. San Diego, Atlanta are your wild cards, trailed ever so closely by Chicago, Milwaukee, and Arizona as potential wild card teams when it comes to Stratomatic. Let's see where Baseball Reference has the teams lined up here as of June 5th. New York Yankees at the top here in the East. That's more like it. That's what we think is going to happen. The Rays behind them. We got the Indians and Twins in the Central. The White Sox still 3 games over 500, so they're still on board there a little bit. The Mariners, man, Baseball Reference still has the Mariners, but Oakland and Houston right on their tail. 2 games out, 1 game out in the American League. That means our wild card teams in the American League would be Oakland and Houston, actually both of them coming from the West. If it expanded from there, Minnesota, followed by the White Sox. No, the Angels even, 33-29. Wow, the AL West, very, very good as of right now, according to Baseball Reference. Going to the National League, the Atlanta Braves, 36-27, 2.5 up on the Nationals. The Cardinals, 6.5 up on the Pirates in the Central. In the NL West, the Dodgers, 11 up on the Rockies, but the Rockies still your first wild card team at 34-28. Your next 2, Pirates and Nationals, would have to play a play-in game to see who would be the deciding factor there in the National League. So tight races, the wild card continuing to do what it's supposed to do, allow more teams the ability to potentially make the playoffs. Baseball Reference, top batting average, let's see. Ozzie Albies at 374, Juan Soto at 364. Pete Alonso, 22 home runs, leads the way. Alvarez with 66 RBIs, but Juan Soto getting close with 63. When it comes to the pitching side of things, ERA leader, Walker Buehler, 1.94, the only guy under 2. Max Scherzer leading the league in strikeouts at 127, being trailed by Garrett Cole ever so closely there. Let's wrap up today's episode. Let's look at the Strat-O-Matic individual performances. Who's leading the way here? From a batting average, we got Edman in St. Louis at 359, Reyes in Cleveland at 352. At the top of the list here when it comes to home runs, Soler with 26, Story with 25, a little bit higher there than in the Baseball Reference. 72 OBIs for Soler would lead both leagues. Oh man, that would be a ton of RBIs through the month of June, coming up almost not even close to the All-Star break. That's in the month of July, if I'm remembering correctly. But looking at the pitching perspective here, let's see. ERA, Blake Snell leads the way, 1.94. Everybody creeping up closer to that 2 mark as we continue through the summer and the weather starts to heat up. The amount of saves, Kennedy has 20. That would be tops across both leagues, so to speak here. Strikeouts, Blake Snell, 123, Garrett Cole, 114, DeGrom, 109 at the top of the list for Strat-O-Matic. And, oh God, it's so frustrating to talk to you guys about simulations and what could potentially be going on, because we're supposed to be 10 weeks into the actual baseball season. We're supposed to be talking about actual injuries, actual standings, actual trades, actual moves that could be going on. But obviously 2020 had something different in mind for us all and is testing us and pushing us, and we're continuing to grind and move forward. Every day is a day closer to baseball. Every day is a day closer to sports. It's almost been 3 months since I joined you guys here on the Baseball Podcast, and we figured out how to talk twice a week here for a little bit over an hour. I've enjoyed every bit of my time, but I just can't wait until actual games are going to be back to discuss. But that'll wrap up the 5th segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, as always, Kevin Mahalik. We're going to pause for a word from one of our sister shows and one of our sponsors, but when we come back, we're going to wrap it up with our fan segment here, talking about managers who we want to see in the golf match. Stick around. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the 6th and final segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Kevin Mahalik, as always, and thank you once again for making it this far into the Baseball Podcast. If you have made it this far, that means you are obligated, though, to head to social media and follow the Baseball Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of the above, as well as the GSMC Podcast Network on social media, as well as rate, subscribe, review to the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, all of the above. We're up to a handful of ratings on iTunes. I appreciate that number continuing to grow, and that's where we got the idea for this segment. One of our fans wrote in the comments, hey, I like the idea about your players in golfing. Well, what about managers? What managers would you want to see or hear on the golf course? And this got me thinking, yes, I involved maybe a couple of guys who aren't of the age to golf anymore, but managers tend to be up there in age when they retire from actually managing. So them to actually go and play golf really doesn't parlay as well as, hey, Tom Brady's 44, he's retired, now he's going to play golf. Well, when guys hang it up at 70 years old, potentially older than that, it's going to be tough for them to get out there. But I align just some personalities, current versus former versus former, and the list is pretty dang good. And I could just imagine the conversation that these people would be having out on the golf course. And jumping right into it, my first two, I had Bobby Cox versus Lou Piniella. I mean, the two guys who have been thrown out probably the most in the history of baseball. I don't have that in front of me, but it'd just be fascinating to see those two guys going at it. Let's see. Bobby Cox, obviously known with the Atlanta Braves. I didn't know that he actually managed the Toronto Blue Jays for 4 years, was with the Braves, then went to the Blue Jays, then was out for 5 years and back to the Braves in 1990, making that run for 20 years all the way to 2010. But over the course of 29 years, over 2,500 wins, 5 pennants, 1 World Series title, just a fascinating career. .556 winning percentage. Some of his tendencies in his career: stole second base 10% of his available opportunities. Wasn't much of a sack bunt guy, only 2.5% of the time. So again, just looking at tendencies. Voting of the year, NL Manager of the Year, it looks like a couple of different times. World Series champs for Bobby Cox. Plenty of stories to tell based on his ejections and everything that happened in his career. But Lou Piniella as well. Lou Piniella, let's see, he managed the Yankees and then the Reds and then the Mariners and then the Devil Rays and then wrapped it up with the Cubs. Let's see, he won a pennant in a World Series with the Reds over the course of his 3 years, 1990 World Series champs with Lou Piniella. His only World Series title in 23 years, but the images of him with the Cubs coming out, kicking the dirt, throwing the bases, just, man, what the heck is just Lou only stole 8.8% of the time, so he was less aggressive on the bases than Bobby Cox. But I think those two combined, the time where they overlapped, obviously there in the 90s, Lou Piniella being with Cincinnati and then Seattle Mariners, and really 2010, they both hung it up the same year. Piniella with the Cubs, Bobby Cox with the Braves. That would be a heck of an overlap and a heck of a matchup. So now we're going to go more towards modern time. The next two individuals, I got Joe Maddon, the manager now for the LA Angels. Obviously longtime manager of the Braves and then the Cubs, now with the Angels. He's been doing it 16 years thus far, .540 winning percentage. He's won 2 pennants and 1 World Series title. Obviously with the Cubs, got their first one. His tendency of stealing 8.8 over the course of his career, sack bunts 1.6. So he does it even less than those other guys. Joe Maddon from Hazleton, Pennsylvania. That's northeast of Philadelphia. Went to Lafayette College. Well, the guy he's going to be going against is known for winning the World Series in Philadelphia. That's Charlie Manuel, Uncle Chuck. We're going to put him on the list. He managed the Indians for 3 years and then the Phillies for 9. .548 winning percentage, 2 pennants, 1 World Series with the Phillies in 08. Let's see, sack bunts 1.9, steals 8.3, a little bit less aggressive, but just Chuck's personality out there on the golf course, everything that he would know about hitting. Let's have Jim Thome in his ear. Maybe they have a conversation about hitting for a hole and Chuck forgets to play golf and just keeps it flowing. Joe Maddon, a younger cat at heart, getting older, but always keeps things loose in the clubhouse. Back to his days in Tampa Bay where he brought the Tampa Zoo in. He had all the wild animals in the clubhouse, I think in September before an important game down the stretch, or maybe it was even a playoff game, but he sensed that everybody was tight, so he called the zoo and brought a snake into the locker room to lighten things up and get everybody loose. That would be fun personalities to learn more about. Next matchup, going back into the time machine just a little bit here, we got Tommy Lasorda. Yes, Tommy Lasorda, manager of the LA Dodgers for 21 seasons. Wow. Let's see, .526 winning percentage, 4 pennants, 2 World Series titles with the Dodgers. His tendencies, 11.6 steal percentage, 2.9 sack bunts, manager of the year. a couple of different times. It would just have been fascinating to see him out there. He's literally from the town I live in now, Norristown, Pennsylvania. Went to Norristown High School. Just amazing to know that guy lives or was from around here in Norristown. For those of you who don't know, a little bit of a smaller town out there, to go to L.A. and hit the big time. It would be amazing to hear. I would love to hear that life story about Lasorda and how he made it from Norristown to L.A. and all the stops in between. But he'll go in up against Earl Weaver. That was the gentleman, the fan who wrote the comment. His pick was Earl Weaver. We got Earl Weaver here into the dance. Longtime manager of the Baltimore Orioles, 17 years, .583 winning percentage, 4 pennants, only 1 World Series out of those 4, but 1970 World Series champion, 3.3 sack bunt percentage, the highest out of all of them, 9.1 steal percentage. Oh man, Earl, just a huge character getting out there, obviously has since passed away. But just, he was fun to watch from what I hear and what I see on YouTube, doing the research, watching more and more videos. He would just be a fun follow. And Earl Weaver having a Twitter, I think would have been a heck of an interaction or a heck of an engagement for the fans back then. But if you guys know more, let me know. Let's see. The next one up, Terry Francona, getting back kind of now. Age, Terry Francona, longtime manager, Phillies, Red Sox, and Indians. 19 years, .542 winning percentage, 3 pennants, 2 World Series titles, an 8% steal percentage, 1.9 sack bunt, 2-time manager of the year. Pennsylvania guy as well. A lot of PA guys here on the list. But Terry Francona, he managed Michael Jordan in the minor leagues. We found out during the Jordan documentary, The Last Dance. So a lot of stories there from Terry he could talk about for days. And we're going to put him up against Joe Torre, manager for the Mets, the Braves, the Cardinals, the Yankees, the Dodgers. All of the above, 29 years, .538 winning percentage, 6 pennants, 4 World Series. Obviously very accomplished as a manager. 11% steal percentage, 2.2 sack bunt, so more aggressive on the base passes than other managers who are on the list. But Joe Torre and Terry Francona, mic'd up, talking baseball, I think would be 2 of the most ridiculous, outrageous individuals who could talk for days, hours, about everything that they've seen throughout their career. And then the last matchup I wrote down, some of the modern guys, Joe Girardi, manager for the Florida Marlins for 1 year, and then the New York Yankees for 10, .554 winning percentage, 1 pennant, 1 World Series title, 8.3 steal percentage, 2.0 sack bunt, manager of the year for his time with the Marlins. Just fascinating, a great communicator. He was on MLB Network. He's done fantastic being introduced in the Philadelphia market. We're going to put him up against Dusty Baker, now manager of the Houston Astros, been out of the game for a few years, but managed the Giants for a long, long time, then the Cubs, then the Reds, then the Nationals, 22 total years, .532 winning percentage. He's won 1 pennant, never won a World Series, but very well respected in the game. 8.6 steal percentage, 2.4 sack bunt, 3-time NL manager of the year. Oh, he's been in the game so long. Just, I want to hear the stories. I want to hear the communicating. Him and Girardi going back and forth would just be excellent, excellent television. But that wraps it up here for this edition of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Once again, I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. Hopefully you guys enjoyed today's episode out there. Thank you for bearing with me through that first segment. It was an uncomfortable conversation, but one we need to have, one I need to continue to have with everybody in my life, and continue to push and move forward and hopefully continue to get America in the right direction and moving the way we need to go as a human race and not as white and black individuals. But I had fun recording for everybody out there. Once again, rate, subscribe, review the podcast, follow us on social media. I am Kevin Mahalik. We'll be back on Monday with the next episode of the Baseball Podcast. Thanks for listening, everybody. Have a great rest of your night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.